Being a huge fan of Hornet, I decided to remake the game but in first person. Well, at least a small portion of it. And since everyone is waiting for Silksong to be released, I chose to go with one of my favorite fights in the game, which is the first fight with Hornet. So here's how the next 150 hours went. The very first thing I decided to do was character modeling. Now the only experience I have with character modeling is making this guy. So going from this to making this did end up taking more time than I thought it would. Definitely this could use a lot of improvements, but for the game this will do. I later also worked on rigging and animating on it. Now that modeling Hornet was out of the way, it was finally time to get into Unity. In order to match with the art style of the original game, I decided to use a toon shader which kinda gives it a 2D look, and was happy to see it go really well with the model. In order to put this into use, I got into coding the attack patterns for Hornet, and she has basically 4 of them. The very first one is a jump attack, also known as where she jumps, aims and dashes towards the player. After that we have the spinning needle attack, aka where she just jumps in the air and creates an area where the player will get hit. I decided to add the particle effects later on, so for now she just seems to be floating in the air. We have the dash attack where she dashes towards the player, and finally the throwing needle attack where a needle moves like a boomerang. Hornet also has 3 other moves, wherein one she just jumps and lands to confuse the player, the other one is her dodging, and the final one is basically her doing a Naruto run. All of which were easier to implement compared to the actual attacks. With Hornet working as intended, it was now time to work on the player. I used the usual code I use for first person movement for my other games, but since Hornet has variable jump height, which means the jump height depends on how long you hold the jump button, I had to update the code to make it work the same way. Currently the player has no body, and since I wasn't really in a mood to model it myself again, I looked around online but none of them were suitable for the game. So in the end I just had to model it myself. Well, on the bright side this took less amount of time to complete since I got to use their workflow and also got some help from a video on YouTube. Just like that, I modeled the player's hand and also the spell sprite that appears in the game, gave it a glowing material and slapped into it some code for it to work. And unlike most first-person games where usually the player's arm or weapon is always visible, I decided to make it appear on screen only when the attack button is pressed, just like in the original game. For the controls, I decided to assign the left mouse button for attack and the right mouse button for casting the spells. Since you can aim the spell in any direction, it kinda makes the spell overpowered than the original game. So instead of decreasing Hornet's health by 2, I made it decrease by only 1 so that it balances out the entire game. I later added a particle effect which plays whenever the player hits Hornet, which is supposed to resemble the soul that is emitted. And as for the player's health, since at this point in the game you'll have 5 mask shards, I assigned 5 health points such that it decreases by 1 on every contact. Also, I'm sorry if this may disappoint some of you, but I decided to not add charms in this game. And I have a good reason for that. Or not, and that's because since this is just a fight against Hornet and no other enemy, you'll mostly just be using Grubsong and Soul Catcher for this fight, considering the fact you don't have many useful charms at this point of the game, at least with respect to the fight. And since adding charm mechanics is going to take quite some time and effort, I felt that adding it isn't really of much use in terms of the fight. With all the Hornet and player mechanics now working, it was now time to work on the background of the game, which is the part I wanted to procrastinate as much as I can. And that's because of the fact that the textures in the background aren't of a single color. So either I had to figure out the way to get those textures, or worse, make it myself. For the ground and plant textures, I used screenshots from the game, did a little bit of editing, and added a normal map, which makes it look kinda 3D in spite of it being a 2D image. The scene is still pretty empty, but recreating the scene by filling the entire background with plants and other objects is definitely not an optimal solution, since it would decrease the frame rate. So instead, I spent a few more hours trying out different stuff like adding a skybox, which looked absolutely horrible by the way, but in the end I finally decided to go with adding the background with plants. I'm aware that I'm deviating from the original game for this, but out of all the options I had, this is definitely the best one. I also created textures for stones and pillars, which to my surprise actually went well with the scene. Now that I had finally finished making the background, it was now time to focus on all the remaining stuff. And by that I mean a lot of remaining stuff. I'm just gonna speedrun this. So I first got into adding particle effects for Hornet, then got to writing code for the game to control the background mechanics like opening and closing the gates and making the scops fall down. I later added UI for the game, added glowing particles which made the scene look more lively. Oh yeah, I also added pogo jump which I forgot to add before, which is pretty fun to use. And finally some music and sound effects. To top it off, I added a pause menu where you can also change the mouse sensitivity and volume, and if you defeat Hornet and go to the exit, a screen should pop up showing you the time taken to defeat her. But if you die, you'll get this screen with a death sound effect playing in the background. I decided not to add a title screen, but instead directly fade in showing the controls for the game. After playing it for more than 25 times and fixing all the bugs I found, it's finally time to show you guys the full gameplay. Oh, and one more thing before that, I just want to let you guys know that I can't release this until I get permission from the developers of the game. So I'll keep you guys updated on that. But if I don't get permission to release this, then it just means that releasing it may cause some issues, which is totally understandable and not their fault. With that out of the way, here's the gameplay. Yep, thank you for watching. See ya.